Hello, this is Teresa Klesser, Director of Marketing with Global Technology Resources. Thank you for joining the GTRI and EMC Isilon webinar. Today's presentation will cover an overview and the benefits of Isilon Scale-Out NAS. Our presenter, Frank Alcantar, is Systems Engineer at EMC. Frank has more than 12 years experience designing, architecting, and managing storage solutions for U.S. federal agencies and enterprises. Again, thank you for joining, and I'd like to turn the presentation over to Frank.
Thank you, Teresa. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Today's presentation, I'm going to give an overview of EMC Isilon as a scale-out NAS storage solution. So today's agenda. I will give an overview of the EMC Isilon platform. We'll talk about some use cases, and then we'll go into a summary of today's call. So first, I want to start with the EMC with the scale out NAS overview and how file data is changing storage needs and how they are evolving. Okay, today we see that additional forces and emerging technology are causing enterprise file data storage the need to further evolve. In addition to keeping pace with the rapid growth of file data and file shares, home directories and various data repositories across the environment, today we see a growing need for requirements, and those requirements are around file shares, home directories, and data repositories. We're seeing the emergence of mobile technologies and the need for mobile-based access. There's also a need for evolving and emerging data analytics, as well as the development to support cloud architectures. Today we're looking for an easy way to do that, a scalable way to do that in order to scale to the growth requirements. We're looking to drive efficiencies. So as we grow these data sets and storage infrastructures, we want to be able to leverage efficiencies as well as make sure that they're secure. So EMC Isilon is setting the standard for a scale-out NAS. It's broadly adopted across many markets. As you can see, industry leaders in the life sciences, healthcare, oil and gas, as well as internet services are leveraging scale-out NAS as a scale-up, scale-out platform, as well as your general IT services, things like enterprise file shares, home directories, data archive, and data analytics. And the message there is that scale-out NAS has a broad adoption, and we're seeing a significant growth pattern around unstructured data, outpacing the growth patterns of block-based, SAN-based storage. So today, EMC Isilon, we have over 4,000 global customers. And the one thing that I really want to point out that, around EMC Isilon, and we'll talk more about this during this presentation, is around OneFS. OneFS being the foundation for Isilon. And the thing I'll point out here is that it's in its seventh generation. And the significance there is that it's a proven, innovative scale-out operating environment that really supports the growth for the unstructured data in today's environment. So Isilon scale-out innovation. So and to give an overview of Isilon and what the benefits of Isilon are, is that it's a single storage pool for file data consolidation. It is simple to use, and in today's presentation, I'll talk about capabilities and technologies and things within Isilon that will hopefully help you understand and really get a foundational understanding of what makes this such an innovative technology. And one is it's simple to use and scale. And we'll talk about how a single person can manage up to 20 petabytes in a single file system. We'll talk about predictable performance. So how you can actually develop Isilon and deploy it and actually have predictable scale as you scale up and scale out the platform. Unmatched efficiency. So we'll talk about how the product has efficiency capabilities and techniques, as well as the ability to be able to leverage 80+% of the raw to usable storage, and how we can leverage automated tiering capabilities, how it's highly resilient. So availability and protection as you scale and as you grow out the cluster. So the more capacity, the more nodes that you add to an Isilon cluster, the more resilient the platform does become. It's enterprise proven. So a lot of capabilities have gone into developing security, enhancing the management, and enhancing the data protection, which allow Isilon to really be deployed in the most enterprise required infrastructures. And then operational flexibility. So the ability from a scale-out NAS perspective to be able to support multiple protocols, multiple NAS-based protocols, things like CIFS, NFS, object-based protocols, RESTful-based protocols, as well as Hadoop. So being able to support, cloud and data analytic platforms. So that's what we'll focus on for the rest of the presentation. So first, I'll start with the Isilon scale-out NAS architecture. So looking at the left-hand side here, where it says client application layer, these are traditionally some of the clients that we do support. And when you look at the top, looking at the top and working our way down, we do support your typical Windows-based clients, your Linux, Unix-based clients, as well as your Apple-based clients. And when you move into the protocols that we do support, here's a list of the protocols that are commonly used for Isilon from an Isilon perspective in order to access the storage. And these are the protocols that we do support, which are CIFS, NFS, HTTP, FTP, HDFS for Hadoop, and then REST for object-based. And from an Ethernet perspective, we do support 1 gigabit Ethernet and 10 gigabit Ethernet. And those are the protocols that tie into, like going one step further, where we tie into the Isilon. It's a node-based architecture. So in this case, we're just showing a typical architecture where we have a bunch of nodes connected together to, via an InfiniBand switch that allow for intra-cluster communications. So this is just a picture of your typical scale-out architecture using Isilon. So moving forward, as I mentioned, Isilon is a node-based architecture. We have 3 different node types that we do support from an Isilon perspective. One is our S series. So S series is really it's purpose-built for IOP intensive, small block, random access, file-based applications. So if you have an environment where you have a lot of random access, small block applications that really put a heavier load from a disk IOP perspective, or a disk IO, or a cluster IO perspective, that's where you would really fit in the S series. Next is the X series. The X series really meets most of the workloads for most of our customers. It's really designed for high concurrent and sequential throughput applications. So when you think of things like video data, unstructured file data, home directories, things, maybe data that requires heavy throughput, but isn't necessarily pushing a lot of back-end disk performance, which is the majority of the workloads when it comes to unstructured data, you would land in the X series. And then the last node type is our NL series. So these are really ideal for, I wouldn't call them deep and cheap, but really deep archive data sets where you really want to have a bulk storage running, running maximum capacity drives, and really putting those on a deeper archive spinning platform, and that's where you will put the NL series. And as I mentioned before, this is a node-based architecture. So I'm going to take the time here to point out that when you build out an Isilon solution, you always start with 3 nodes. So whether you start with an S series, an X series, or an NL series, you have to start with 3 of a kind. So there are, and we'll talk about that later in this presentation, there are situations where you'll deploy more than one node type. You might deploy an X series and an NL series, and you would deploy 3 of each, and then you can tier data within there. So we'll talk more about that in the down the road in this presentation. So the core innovation around Isilon is OneFS, the Isilon OneFS operating system. OneFS does combine the file system, the volume manager, and its data protection features all into one operating environment called OneFS. Some of the benefits that OneFS does bring is single file system simplicity. Okay, the ability to just basically have one single file system that spans across every node in the cluster. So whether you start with a 3-node cluster or scale out to a 20-node or our maximum node count configuration, which is 144 nodes in a single cluster, is still one single file system. It is high performance, and I say high performance in that as you scale the cluster out, as you add a node, if you start with a 3-node cluster and you add additional nodes, anytime you add a node, you're adding compute, you're adding network I/O, and you're adding capacity. So it scales in a linear fashion. Because anytime you have an Isilon cluster, and anytime you're doing any read-write operations, storing data, running any processes against the storage, every node participates in the cluster. So hopefully that gives you a picture around, as you have more nodes, you have more workers to participate in the operation. Next is unmatched efficiency. So as you do scale, you do leverage OneFS, and you do have a scaled Isilon cluster, the more nodes you have in the cluster, the more spread out the data is going to be. Right, so you're able to drive better efficiency because you're able to load balance across all the nodes in a cluster. And then there's automated tiering, so the ability to actually have different node types in a pool. So still have a single file system, have different node types in a pool, and be able to write data to your performance pool, but then automatically tier data down to your archive pool, while never having to impact the user or making any configuration changes on the back end. This is all done through configuration on the back end, and data movement is done over the InfiniBand infrastructure. And then next is linear scalability and easy growth, and I'll go into more detail as we move forward. So part of OneFS, it includes a comprehensive enterprise software, and it really includes a lot of robust features as part of OneFS. So some of the most important features I want to go over today are centered around data protection and then data management. So first we'll go through snapshots. Snapshots are fast and efficient data backup and recovery. So they are pointer-based snapshots that give you the ability to leverage that for real-time protection and being able to do common things of having a snapshot schedule, protecting, say, home directories or unstructured data, and giving the ability to go in and, one, perform global-wide or cluster-wide recovery if that's necessary, or, which is really more common, individual file recovery. Okay. Next we provide the capability we have is called SyncIQ. SyncIQ is our asynchronous replication. And next we have SmartConnect, which is a load balancing. So we have every Isilon OneFS cluster comes with SmartConnect Basic, but we also have a SmartConnect Advanced, and what that provides are a richer feature capability around how to manage client connections to the actual cluster itself. So there may be a situation where maybe you've got some clients that need a higher quality of bandwidth or improved bandwidth or connection configuration versus, say, some general users who are using it for basic file sharing. So you could, in theory, have some higher performance users, and you're able to actually set that quality using our SmartConnect. And then SmartLock being worm-based, so the ability to be able to write once and read many, more for compliance. And then on the data management side, we have SmartPools. So SmartPools, again, is our auto tiering, SmartDedupe, and I'm going to go into some of these in more detail here in following slides. But SmartDedupe is more designed around improving overall efficiency to the system. So the ability to be able to do block level deduplication at the AK block level for the individual files themselves. Smart quotas. So as you implement file, a file system for all your users, the ability to be able to manage, users and how much capacity you're using for your capacity planning and capacity management purposes. You do that through smart quotas. And then InsightIQ is actually something that's it's deployed as a virtual machine, a virtual appliance in your infrastructure that is a enhanced monitoring and reporting in order to manage the resources for the Isilon system itself. So now we'll go into some of the capabilities in more detail. One I want to talk about is our ease of use. So the Isilon simplicity and ease of use. So Isilon, it is a single volume that spans across all the nodes. So the directories and files are striped across the cluster. And I think I mentioned this earlier in this presentation, but every node in the cluster is a peer node. There is no concept of a peer node and there is no concept of a slave node and a master node. Every node is an equal participating member in the cluster. So if you have 3 nodes to 20 nodes, every node equally participates, and that's fairly important, because what that does is that gives you an idea is anytime you have to do things like a disk repair or reconstruct data for a large read or a write, every node is using all the resources available in that node to actually help with that operation. It's also fully operated. Fully automated. So OneFS is fully automated, and what that means is there's no manual intervention anytime you need to add a node, remove a node, add data, move data. All that's fully automated within OneFS. There's no reconfiguration. There's no server or client or mount points or application changes, and no data migrations and no RAID. And a lot of that is because of there's no traditional. Within OneFS, we're not building any RAID groups. We're not taking drives and putting them into RAID sets and then provisioning those RAID sets so that we can lay out data. It's a concept of a data RAID. So it's an N plus X or an N plus M in this case model, in the sense that depending on the protection levels that you set at the Isilon on the Isilon cluster, whether it's at the cluster wide or directory level, data is striped across the nodes at the time the data is created, and that helps with that automation. And that is how there's no need to create RAID groups, because we're creating this data RAID at the time the data is created. So with that, we do gain new levels of efficiency. One of a very important feature that's available as part of the common element of OneFS is a feature we called AutoBalance. So AutoBalance is the automated data balancing across nodes, which reduce cost, complexity, and risk for scaling storage. Now, what that means is, and for the group here, you're seeing the picture of 5 nodes. If I was using this as a build slide, what you would see is 4 nodes. Those 4 nodes, I was showing the bar there on the right as them being full. What happens is, say you've got an Isilon cluster and it's showing as a full or near full storage space. What I did is we go ahead and you add another node to the cluster. When you add that node to the cluster, there's a feature called AutoBalance, which now kicks in, and it automatically starts to auto-balance all the data across, where before it was across 4 nodes, it now auto-balances across 5 nodes. So when you do that, part of the significant aspect of that is if from a traditional perspective, if you had a traditional storage platform and you started to have to add new capacity, you get to the point where you have to start moving data around, rebuilding new RAID groups and things like that. Well, because there's no concept of building RAID groups, it's all a data RAID, okay? When you add that node, data is basically rebalanced, it's rewritten using the back-end InfiniBand network, not the front-end Ethernet network that I spoke about earlier, but on the back-end InfiniBand network, and basically balances the data across all 5 nodes. So now what happens is you've got 5 nodes that all have free space. So as new writes come into the new data is written to the cluster, it'll actually be written to all 5 nodes now versus all 4 nodes. So you don't have to go in there and actively manage that and repoint that. And so that's really an important feature that's done automatically. So next I want to talk about SmartPools. I made mention of it, and what SmartPools is, it really is it's our ability within OneFS to create a storage pool and be able to leverage an automated tiering capability. So it does provide a single point of management. When you have an Isilon cluster and you want to manage that cluster, you actually point to the IP address of the cluster, and when you do that, it brings up OneFS, and anytime you manage that OneFS, you're managing every node that's tied into that cluster. Okay, you don't have to manage. You don't manage each node individually. It's all managed as a single cluster. So the SmartPools, while leveraging the single point of management, it does give you a single file system, single volume, but being able to spread that and have a different tiered approach. So as you look at the chart on the right, you can see how S series provide performance, X provide collaboration, and NL provide archives. What happens is you can actually have a performance, say 3 S series nodes, 3 X series nodes, and 3 NL series nodes. Put them in a Isilon cluster. You could actually have 3 pools of storage, and when a user writes a data, the user writes data to the Isilon cluster, and it writes it as a file. It writes to the file system. It never has to the user never has to think about where the data lands. However, from a administrative and a management perspective, the storage administrator can actually have policies that are configured within the Isilon cluster that will tell the Isilon system internally where that data should land. For instance, you might have somebody who writes to their home directory, and it's writing, say, all their unstructured data for their home directory could be going to the S series tier. Now, when that same user is writing to the home directory, they may have PDF files. You may set a policy that says anytime a PDF file is written, write it down to the NL series and right away. So what happens is when a user goes and writes their data, it'll write all data to the S series, but if there's something with a .pdf extension, it'll automatically write it down onto the archive tier. So it just gives you, but it gives you an idea that this is all done on the back end, while the user has no idea that there's even policies being met. So it just kind of gives you the idea of the power of SmartPools. There's also a lot of other pooling policies, things like if a file hasn't been touched in 30 days, if a file, you could basically set those triggers yourself. If the file hasn't been touched in 7 days, if a file meets this, if a file doesn't meet this. Also, you could use things like if a file is this but it doesn't have this, then also tier it. So it just gives you an idea of the power of SmartPools. And really what SmartPools is designed to do is to give you more of a improved total cost of ownership when it comes to the Isilon platform. So not having to scale out with all one tier, now you can actually leverage a tiered storage approach to drive efficiency. And that's really how SmartPools would help your environment. So next I want to talk about is SmartDedupe. Okay, SmartDedupe is our data deduplication. And really, again, this is something that's really designed for an efficiency, for driving efficiency within your environment. Okay, SmartDedupe is a post process, so as data lands on the Isilon cluster, there's a process that goes in there and deduplicates. It runs a validation against all the data that's on the cluster, and goes ahead and validates that and deduplicates that at an 8K block level. It is cluster-wide. Well, so because Isilon is a single file system and there are no containers of storage that it has to work with, you can actually run deduplication cluster-wide or as granular as down to the directory. And if you have an environment that's already in production, or say you deploy an Isilon cluster and you haven't enabled dedupe, we actually have a process that'll go out there and actually crawl the file system and tell you whether deduplication will help you or not. So it'll give you a report that says this is the benefit, this is the impact it would be if you did enable deduplication. So it's really designed for increased efficiency. So some of the benefits are that you could see up to 30% more efficiency, and that is, you have to buy 30% less storage, power, cooling, rack space. It's really about driving a denser footprint and leveraging the storage that you do have, and really improving the whole total cost of ownership of that solution. So next I want to talk about is our disaster recovery, and I've mentioned that in the previous slides. Our SyncIQ. So our SyncIQ is our asynchronous replication, really designed for disaster recovery. If you wanted to have a business continuous plan where you wanted to have 2 Isilon clusters, maybe you've got your S series or your X series production cluster, and then you want to archive off or replicate data to say an NL series, or for that matter, even another S or X series, you can do that. Okay, it's for disk-to-disk backups, it's for remote archive, and we do have the capability with the OneFS for a push-button failover and failback. Okay, so it is block efficient and file specific. So when you leverage SyncIQ, our replication, it's block efficient because it's actually leveraging our 8K block OneFS block size, and it takes internal snapshots to do that, and can be all the way down to the individual file. So you can get very specific when you're replicating any data that you need to the secondary site. So it leverages, and here is what I mentioned about the Snapshot IQ. It leverages snapshots. It's per directory. It's a per directory policies and granularity. Unlimited snapshots per cluster. And so it's really important to understand is it really is truly is unlimited. There's 1,024 per directory, but from a cluster-wide perspective, it's virtually unlimited. Minimal impact of performance, and it allows tiered snapshots as well. So next I want to talk about is security and compliance. So security and compliance, and this is really focused around around the security aspect and the compliance options that come with OneFS. So we do have capabilities called role-based access. So when it comes to managing Isilon in an environment where you have multiple groups, maybe multiple enclaves within a group, and different authentication environments, or groups that have maybe their own Active Directories or LDAP servers and things of such, you can use it. You can use it in this kind of environment. So it does have role-based access. You can have somebody who, and it's really designed for, say you want to have somebody who's responsible for just managing quotas. That person can log in to the Isilon and actually only have access to manage quotas. So you can do it's that level of granularity. Authentication zones. So authentication zones. So if you look at the picture there on the left, we have a legal department, an accounting, a marketing, and an IT. We can actually set up different security enclaves. Now, it's not multi-level security, but it does have the ability to, if you had a lab or an environment where you had maybe a small legal department, your engineering department, and the IT department, and you want to have their own security so they can make sure that they protected access to their data, you can actually have, it can join multiple different security zones. So join Active Directory in one environment and join Active Directory in another. So that's where the authentication zones come into play. And then worm data protection. So the ability to, if you're in an environment and compliance is important, then you could leverage the write once, read many capabilities. We do have a lot of capabilities and growing capabilities around file system auditing. So we do have some integration with some third-party companies like Varonis, but we also, have a lot of native auditing capabilities around, who's doing what in the system, who's accessing what files, and things of such. So it gives you really, some good information around auditing within the Isilon platform itself. And then lastly, they're around data at rest encryption. So we do have a data at rest encryption which leverages self-encrypting drives. So if you had a requirement where you had to deploy your unstructured data in a NAS environment and you needed self-encrypting drives, you can do that with Isilon. We do have that, and when you deploy an Isilon cluster, you actually deploy it with all self-encrypting drives or no self-encrypting drives. So it isn't all or nothing when you're doing that, but it is a capability that is available. And then to close, I appreciate the time here, but to close on the Isilon platform itself, as I've talked about today, the Isilon, just to kind of close on the advantages that I was talking about from an enterprise NAS storage perspective, it really is simple to manage. So through our partnership with GTRI, we could show you. We can schedule demos, and we can show you how easy it is to use. It is simple to manage. It is a single file system, a single volume, and it does scan across every node and having a global namespace. We scale up to 20 petabytes, and we've talked about the unmatched efficiencies. And one of the things I will say for the call, and I hadn't mentioned this in the past, I personally myself have built many solutions for many different customers, and when you start getting into the 5 to 6 node size of an architecture, you can actually start to realize into 70 to 80% of usable to raw capacity. So if you have experience where you've deployed storage systems using traditional controller-based architectures and RAID type infrastructures, and you deploy those, you notice this number should really stand out, because you might be seeing somewhere in the range of maybe 50 to 60% usable to raw storage, whereas on the Isilon cluster, with simply starting, once you get to 5 and 6 nodes, you can really get to 80% of usable capacity versus raw capacity that's available in the system. And then enterprise data protection. So we talked about some of the capabilities around data protection, and then here you can see here that I have an N+1 and an N+4 redundancy. So that's just, I didn't go too much into the data protection algorithms around how data is rated on the back end, but just to mention the terms. So in case we need to follow up with the conversation around that, we do support an N+1, N+2, N+2:1, N+3, N+4, and we also have an 8-way mirror. So those are just the different options you have when you start protecting data. And the one thing I do want to mention about that is when you set data protection up for an Isilon cluster, you may have a cluster-wide data protection setting of N+2:1, which means you can lose 2 drives in a node or 1 complete node out of an entire cluster, right? So if you think about the N+4, you could lose actually 4 nodes in a cluster. Now, you have to maintain what's called quorum, so you have to have more than 50% of the nodes online in order to still be in a read-write function, read-write state. So that means at a minimum, in order to leverage N+4, you would have to have 9 nodes in your cluster. So just to point that out, but the point that I wanted to drive to for the group here is when you're doing that, you can actually set a global policy of N+2:1, but if you actually found that you had some of your data was more important than other, because we really have a feeling that not all data is created equal. If you had a directory that was maybe more sensitive, that you wanted to ensure was better protected, you can actually set the data protection levels at the by the individual file or any directory level up and down the directory tree. So you have that level of flexibility. And then the last things there were around security and the operational flexibility. So we've talked a lot about the security and compliance and some of the other capabilities, but from an operational flexibility perspective, it is multi-protocol support. So it can support multi-protocol access to the array and to the same file system. So that'll help when you start deploying this in an environment where you have maybe Windows users and Linux users, and maybe you're deploying a cloud-based architecture and you want object-based access to the storage system. You can do that as well. So it just giving you that flexibility to really allowing you to support all your business needs. And that is going to conclude the overview of Isilon. Now, I did want to spend just a couple of minutes here talking about some of our use cases. I went ahead and put together 2 different use cases for you to consider, just to give you as an example to hopefully help you see where the value of Isilon can be in these types of environments. And the first one is around video surveillance. If you can look at if you can see the picture that's here, what you'll see is you're going to see that this is a typical approach utilizing a traditional storage approach to building out a video surveillance environment. If you look at the cameras up top, tied into their VMS, which is the video management system, okay, and all the storage associated with that VMS. So what I show here, there are different LUNs. So 4 LUNs per VMS. It could be local storage. It could be a SAN-based array that's providing storage. But you can see how as the environment scales, as you add more cameras, or even as important, as you upgrade cameras and you require more storage because there's bigger, better frame rates, better picture quality, which are going to drive the storage requirements higher and higher. What happens is you can see how this becomes a very complex environment. So you have a VMS that's got an operating environment. It's managing the cameras. It's also managing storage. You're having to figure out how you store, where you store these videos, and then how are you archiving all that data. So it becomes really kind of a data management nightmare. And so how Isilon can fit in this type of an environment is being able to go in there and actually replace all of that disparate storage or island or silo-based storage, creating a single file system. Now you still have the same cameras out there. They're still collecting all the data. And you can see even by the picture, there's a bunch of different camera types. So it's going to be hard to kind of manage how much data you need. Well, using Isilon OneFS, what you're doing at this point is you're actually taking the Isilon platform and you're creating directories. So all these VMSs are storing data to file directories that are stored on the single Isilon cluster. And at this point, then you can leverage all the features that I talked about in the past around storage pools, tiering, deduplication, which I know this is video, so maybe not the most dedupable data sets, but it gives you the idea now where before you might have had to have a couple of guys doing a full-time job managing day-to-day storage. Here you got somebody that just doesn't really necessarily have to manage it on a day-to-day, but just more provide the storage framework for the VMSs to be able to store their video data. Okay, and again, that can continue to grow. So as you add more cameras and improve these cameras to upgrade to be better cameras, you just continue to scale out the Isilon cluster, and nothing changes. You don't have to reconfigure the camera environment. And that's the video surveillance overview part of it. The last thing I'll talk about is how to protect data from a disaster. So we've talked about SyncIQ. Okay, so I wanted to just kind of give you a simple picture that you could look at it. When you look at this, you could see how there is, on the left-hand side, you've got data. Okay, so you've got some corporate information, some archive application data, some indexing data, and those are being read and written from the corporate side, from the corporate information side, read and written using CIFS and NFS. Okay, so as this data is being written to the Isilon cluster, we're using the capability called SmartPools, again, that I talked about earlier, to tier the data. Once the data is sitting on the Isilon cluster, we're able to utilize SyncIQ, okay, which is our replication, asynchronous replication, to replicate that over to, say, the DR site. So a couple of options that you have here. If for some reason you lost the Isilon target at the primary site, you can actually point the corporate. In this case, it's really talking about how it's indexing, copying data, searching data, more of kind of an indexing service, some kind of maybe a database indexing service, but it could be users, it could be any kind of use out there. You could point users over to the DR site temporarily while you bring the primary site back online, and then you can actually true up both the primary and the secondary so that you can eventually bring the primary site back up online. So this is kind of giving you a picture of how to protect your archive data from a disaster. You know, a lot of the things that I was talking to you before in this presentation were around how to protect your primary data, how it scales up, how it scales out, how it's efficient, and how it has a lot of the capabilities to really, you know, provide for a flexible environment, but also maintains survivability by being a node-based architecture and recoverability. You know, if you ever have, you know, any kind of data or hardware failures, this is really a picture from a disaster recovery perspective. And with that, I am done with this presentation. So I thank you for your time, and Teresa, I'll hand it back to you.
Frank, thank you for your time today. We appreciate the insights and the solutions you provided, especially the use cases. Those were very insightful. To our attendees, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to contact GTRI at sales@gtri.com or call us at 877-603-1984.